In these sections, we are going to explore heart diseases. And on that basis, the first question that arises is, what are these psychic heart diseases that I have been talking to you about? Well, it is nothing other than what happens in your psychic heart when you experience some type of trauma. As you have thoroughly suffered some kind of disappointment in love throughout your life, just like all of us, I include myself in that group, you can now begin to glimpse what I am talking about. You suffer some disappointment, and immediately a physical sensation of pain arises in you, particularly in the area of your chest, which manifests itself in various ways, and that stays with you long after you have suffered that emotional trauma you have experienced because of that disappointment, because that pain continues to activate under certain circumstances. That is why it is so important that you learn about psychic heart diseases, because these diseases can cause a series of effects on you which will grow and cause greater problems if you do not treat them. The other thing that is important for you is that if you manage to recognize these heart diseases, you will develop the ability to generate the most effective treatments to combat these diseases that we are going to be seeing here, with which you will strengthen your emotional resistance, the added value that comes with this part of this therapy. Since if you suffer from any illness of your psychic heart, you will know what to do to repair your injured heart much faster than you did before doing this program. Given this frame of reference, I am now going to introduce you to the diseases to which your psychic heart is exposed and which in the following sections we will be working on in greater depth. First, we have what happens to you when your heart breaks into several pieces. That would be the first illness of your psychic heart that we are going to treat. Why it is important that you learn about it? Because if you don't treat the effects of a heart that breaks into a dozen spars, the pieces into which your heart is divided will gradually break. Therefore, as you can see, your psychic heart will continue to crack for a long time after you experience the trauma. And that will cause the separation that your heart is experiencing through this breaking process. It will increasingly occur in greater quantity and with less separation in time, which in turn will cause the pain you feel in your chest and in the energy of your psyche to become greater and greater. That is why it is so important that you recognize when your heart breaks. The second illness of your psychic heart that we are going to explore in these sections is what happens to you when your heart is stopped. When due to some emotional trauma you feel a pang, a blow that cuts you very deeply. Which is important because if you don't treat a stabbed heart, your energy and your body will start cutting itself. That is the greatest effect, and therefore the wounds you generate will become greater and greater with the passage of time. The third illness of your psychic heart that we are going to see here is what happens to you when your heart is hit, as if it received a very strong blow from someone. Why is it important that we work on this issue? Well, because if you do not treat the consequences of a heart that has suffered a very hard blow, that pain that you felt at the time of the trauma will spread to other areas of your body, with which there will be a much more harmful effect on your health, not only psychological, but also your physical health. Because on the one hand, your life is going to begin to completely paralyze because you are not going to have the motivation to move, but you are also going to begin to somatize that pain that you feel in your chest in other areas. That is why it is so important to recognize and treat a case like this as quickly as possible. The fourth disease of your psychic heart that we are going to see in these sections is what happens to you when your heart becomes blurred. That is to say, when it goes out, it loses its light, its brilliance, and you begin to live in a kind of emotional darkness. Why is it important that you treat the effects of a frame like this? Well, mainly because if you don't, you are going to develop a state of chronic insecurity and fear. Therefore, by avoiding risk, the adventure that your life will subject you to, you will miss the greatest opportunities to achieve happiness. Nothing more, nothing less. The other effect, and in my opinion the most relevant for the case of a person whose heart shuts down, is that at one point they even begin to shut down their soul, and with it, their own spirit. And the fifth disease of your psychic heart that we are going to see here is the one that occurs when your heart no longer exists, or at least you stop perceiving it. You don't feel it anymore. And in turn, that causes you to begin to experience a huge emptiness inside your being, with which you also enter a state of apathy. The importance of working on this psychic heart disease is that if you do not treat the effects of a heart that shuts down, you will eventually lose the ability to recognize what is good and bad for you, which in turn will begin to harm yourself, and in the process, you could end up harming other people. That is why it is so important that you address that emptiness so that you do not become someone who is going to go around the world doing evil. So, this is what we are going to be working on in these sections, with which, as I said, you will strengthen your psychic immune system, the first step, so you can learn to heal your heart and strengthen it. I will see you in the following sections where we'll be exploring each of these diseases of your psychic heart in greater depth.